I shall hand over to Clive Thomas. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Good afternoon all and welcome. It's a really good turnout. A big thank you to Emma and to Legal News for hosting this Return to the Workplace event on behalf of the Law Management Section, LMS of the Law Society. That's a community for partners, leaders and practice managers in legal businesses. The section provides support and guidance through our magazine, webinars, events and the financial benchmarking service. So if you're not a member, you should seriously consider joining. So over the next hour, members of the committee of LMS will be speaking to help law firms prepare for a safe and confident return to the workplace. So our first speaker this afternoon is David Gilmore. David is a director and founder of DG Legal, the largest provider of strategic and compliance services operating in the legal sector only in England and Wales. David has worked with hundreds of law firms and several government departments, including the Home Office, the Ministry of Justice, the Welsh Assembly Government and the Legal Services Commission. So over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Clive. I'm just going to share my screen. Right, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. We're going to be covering 4 areas over the course of the next hour or so. I'm going to start with talking about risk assessments, and I'll go on to preparing the office and staff for a return to the workplace. We'll then move on to a case study that Clive is going to present about his firm, and then Nadia will talk about the future of work and operating post-COVID-19. So I'm doing the first section. Just move this over. Right, returning to the office, or indeed returning to work, will be a welcome relief for some, particularly for those living in flats. But for others, it might come as a shock. Many will find it hard, who've got used to spending time with their families. And in the interim period before returning, we think it's important to regularly keep in touch with staff, keep them involved, let them know what's happening. You might do that, for example, through newsletters or phone calls or Zoom calls, etc. And many firms have implemented a team quiz. Do we have to do a COVID-19 risk assessment? Well, as per the cartoon, some may have wished that they'd carried out a risk assessment at the time of proposal. Now, all employers, irrespective of whether they feel they need to reopen the office at this time, must conduct a COVID-19 risk assessment. If your firm has less than 5 workers or are self-employed, you don't have to write anything down as part of this risk assessment. If you have 5 or more workers, the assessment must be documented in writing. More than 50 employees, well, the government expects the employer to publish the results. But again, it doesn't say if this will be enforced. The assessment is not intended to risk assess individual home working arrangements, but to provide an overall assessment of the risks to staff and other people from your current arrangements, and importantly, any change to working arrangements, such as a return to office working. The assessment process must be conducted and any control and protective measures implemented before the office reopens. This may of course take many weeks, so any rush to implement any recommended office working is clearly not advisable or practical. How do we conduct the risk assessment? Well, the risk assessment must be carried out in consultation with your staff in order to establish what guidelines and practical measures to put in place. The assessment need not be cumbersome. The government's guidance clarifies that a risk assessment is not about creating huge amounts of paperwork, but rather about identifying sensible measures to control the risks in your workplace. Your risk assessment will help you decide whether you've done everything you need to. In particular, the firm should identify and evaluate the risks to health and safety from COVID-19 in the workplace and in other locations where employees, home workers or others may operate from or visit in the course of the business. The firm should also analyse what the firm is already doing to control those risks and consider other possible measures to reduce, avoid or transfer the risks. How do we conduct the risk assessment? Well, once you've formulated a list of the risks, you undertake an impact/likelihood analysis for each risk. For each risk, you should consider whether the impact would be high, medium or low, and whether its likelihood is high, medium or low. This will help you determine the severity of each risk. Where you determine that a particular health and safety concern would have a high impact and is highly likely to occur, you should prioritise the measures you put in place to address that risk. Once the risks have been identified and evaluated, consider the steps which need to be put in place to mitigate each risk. Also consider what you already have in place to control the risks and what additional measures need to be implemented in order to properly control the risks. Then, once you've identified those risks and what you need to do to control them, put the appropriate measures in place before they are needed. Now, it is of course entirely possible that your risk assessment may determine that the risk to health and welfare of returning to the office would be so severe that it would be very difficult to implement sufficient measures to mitigate against the risks at the current time. Now, this is an example template that DG Legal have produced. We are worried that some of our clients might want to blindly copy this template, and there are more examples to come. Of course, many of these examples will apply to most firms, but please do think about your own circumstances and adapt it accordingly. If you want to use the template, please click on the source in the top right-hand corner once you have received the slides. So don't click now, nothing will happen. You will be getting the slides later. We shall go through a couple of examples in a few moments. Again, just a few more example risks there. And once you've completed that template, you can then complete a health and safety action list. So that's the first section done, talking about the risk assessment. The second is about preparing the office and staff for a return to the workplace. What measures must you implement when you reopen the office? Well, the answer is that you'll need to implement whatever you've determined from your COVID-19 risk assessment. In other words, after you've completed the risk assessment template. You'll need to access the premises, of course, and work as a team to determine what measures can practically be implemented. You'll need to factor in some time, the time it will take you to put these measures into place. For instance, if you determine that you need to reconfigure your desks, work out who will do this and when. You may have identified that you need to purchase certain equipment, such as personal protective equipment or floor tape to delineate safe areas, which may not be readily available at present. You'll need to ensure that the equipment is in place and all necessary measures implemented before you change the working arrangements. Even if you're not planning to open the office soon, all firms should consider now what they may need to have in place when they reopen. What practical measures must you implement when reopening the office? Well, of course, the current position is, of course, maintain 2 meters social distancing wherever possible. You'll probably have heard in the news that the government is debating whether to change the 2 meter rule. As I've put in this graphic, I would support switching to the 1 alligator rule. So I'm being a little bit facetious here, but that's 1 adult alligator for now, and perhaps switching to a baby alligator from the 1st of August. But for now, the government's guidance states that employers should redesign workspaces to maintain 2 meter distances between people by staggering start times, creating one-way walkthroughs, opening more entrances and exits, or changing seating layouts and break rooms. Where people cannot be 2 meters apart, manage the transmission risk. I was made aware of an example last week of a firm in London that have decided to take fairly extreme measures with the toilets. So what they've decided to do is keep all toilet doors, including the inside doors, open at all times and have somebody guarding the entrance to the toilet. Now, whilst that may be very COVID-19 friendly, I would imagine that many, if not most employees would be quite upset by such an arrangement. I would think a much more practical and sensible alternative would be to use disposable gloves, like the type you find at petrol stations. The government's guidance states that employers should look into putting barriers in shared spaces, creating workplace shift patterns or fixed teams minimising the number of people in contact with one another, or ensuring colleagues are facing away from each other. Cleaning processes, the government's guidance has stated that workplaces should be cleaned more frequently, paying close attention to high contact objects like door handles and keyboards. Employers should of course provide hand washing facilities and hand sanitizers at entry and exit points. Published compliance. You will need to display a standard notice confirming your compliance with the government's guidance on managing the risk of COVID-19 in your workplace to show their employees, customers, and other visitors that you have followed the government's guidance. Finally, are there any other issues to think about? Well, there may of course be employment law related issues to consider. You will need to contact those staff members who you are proposing should start working again from your office. You may need to amend the terms of an existing arrangement, such as in relation to current home working, or even to terminate an existing furlough agreement. These staff members will need to be given an appropriate notice period, such as one defined in any existing agreement. So this period and engagement process must be factored into your planning. If you have any other concerns, you may wish to discuss them with an employment lawyer. Okay, I've just stopped the screen sharing, so I'll hand over to Clive for his case study.
Thanks so much, David. That's extremely helpful. So I'm the managing partner of Watkins & Gunn, and I'm going to give a brief case study of the measures we've taken to date and plan to take regarding reopening. In Wales, we're of course waiting on an announcement on Friday from the First Minister as to whether lockdown will be eased to allow offices to open in a modified manner. So next slide. Thank you. So just to set the scene, I'll explain who we are. We're a 6-partner practice with 5 associates. We have 3 offices across South Wales, in Cardiff, Newport, and our head office in Pontypool. Oh, you weren't too many there. And we're just under 50 of us in total. We are in the main office based, although our lawyers had the ability to work at home if they wished. We still predominantly use paper files, although we were slowly moving towards a paper-light environment. Next slide, please, Emma. So we're a high street practice carrying out a range of legal services that you can see set out within the slide. So moving to lockdown. Next slide, please. So we had 3 priorities in the pandemic, like the rest of you, I'm sure. First, to keep everyone safe, we closed all 3 offices other than for post and scanning and some essential work, and we furloughed about 1/4 of the staff. Second priority was to keep the business running, so I think we advanced about 3 years in about 3 weeks in terms of adapting to remote working. We overcame so many issues that we'd previously parked. Staff have been great in finding workarounds, but that's a whole talk in itself. Third priority was to keep the phones ringing, of course. We're very conscious of the lag effect. That is, if we don't win new clients, we will see the effects further down the line. So we've been keen to market those adapted services in context on social media and on the website, and delivering the message that we are very much still open for business. Next slide. We've had to improvise. and see essential clients such as those collecting wills after some tragic COVID deaths. One day I set up a table in the office porch to get the job done safely. I put that photo on social media. I should have known better that I'd get abuse. Next slide. Thank you very much, Richard Jones from Law Study Wales, for that contribution. Next slide. So returning to the workplace. We're planning a modified return subject to Friday's government announcement in Wales. And we're assuming that the requirements will be broadly similar to those that David outlined in England. The main priority remains keeping everyone safe. As we all know, we have a legal duty to ensure the health, safety and welfare of all employees. In Wales, of course, we also have to take all reasonable measures to ensure that the 2-metre distance is maintained on work premises. So first thing we did was send a questionnaire to all of our staff to establish their health and their personal circumstances that may impact on their ability to return to work. This will inform our decisions on the people we choose to bring back. Next slide. We carried out a risk assessment. We used the one in the Law Society's toolkit online, which is the one on the left, which is more general, and also the DG Legal one that David has mentioned, as we're clients of DG Legal, and they produce some excellent stuff around compliance. His risk assessment is a little more detailed, and we found it very helpful to complete. What kept coming up time and again as control measures were limiting numbers in the office, use of PPE, enhanced cleaning and hand washing, and taking extra care in communal areas. But I think the key will be enforcing those systems. The problem will be complacency. When I was out on a bike ride, would you believe, this weekend around my hometown of Barry Baidos, and I was struck by the number of people congregating together. Some people, it seems, have stopped listening in their own lives, but as soon as they step through the office door, we are responsible as employers. And we must make those rules stick until they become second nature. So next slide. So practicalities. This is our Pontypool office. It's a big old building on 4 floors, a listed building. So to begin with, we arranged a deep clean of this office and the other 2 offices too. We had the water systems checked in Pontypool and the water coolers cleaned out. We didn't want a Legionnaires issue like the one we'd read about in Lincoln's Inn. We also ordered social distancing signs, screens and PPE, gloves and masks. I couldn't resist getting some branded ones, which are on the way. And we printed off the office signs from the Law Society toolkit. Next slide. Here's the front of our building with signage. Note the camera by the front door, I'll come back to. Next slide. Here's the way into the office with signage and bilingual Law Society posters in Welsh and English. Notice another camera. This then leads into reception, which has a protective screen around it. We've also got a hand sanitizer just there as you come into reception. The idea is that clients will stop on the feet sign and are directed to use the hand sanitizer and then go straight to one of our meeting rooms with no loitering or waiting in the reception area. So next slide, if it works, is a quick video of a client's eye view of the journey, like a Lloyd Grossman through the keyhole style. Let's see if it works. Here we go. In comes the client, wandering into the office, obviously wanting excellent legal services. Approaching the door, they press a buzzer and be spotted by that camera above. The coast is clear. So in comes the client. Spotting the bilingual signs ahead. In we go, there's the hand sanitizer for use, following those arrows. Guess to the feet, stop. Oh, have a look at the hand washing signs. Stop at the feet. And then the receptionist behind the screen will instruct the client to use hand sanitizer or go to one of our meeting rooms directly. It just shows you around the what we've done around the reception area in terms of the sneeze screen protection. So like the Blair Witch Project, wasn't it? Oscars to follow, no doubt, for that. So next slide. That's the CCTV cameras I mentioned. They're in place and can be viewed by the receptionist to regulate people coming in and follow their journey to reception and make sure no one else is passing in the corridor. Next slide is the meeting rooms with the anti-sneeze screens up. Too many chairs in one of those, actually. We'll take some of those chairs out following our risk assessment. Next slide. Toilets with signage. No toilet guards, sadly, David, but they must be on furlough. Next slide. I had a test drive of the new procedure with my first client allowed in the office who'd come in as she needed an urgent declaration. She was very happy and wrote us a nice 5-star Google review, as you can see there. So clients will really appreciate the efforts you make to keep them safe. Next slide. So we're looking forward as partners. We think this is a real opportunity to have a blank sheet of paper instead of being governed by the way we've always done things, as that mold has been broken. It would be a real shame to lose that opportunity by just going back to doing things like we always have and reverting to type. So we're discussing what we want to keep hold of out of the adaptations that we've made and those improved efficiencies that have been well received by clients. We also want to be more paper light. When lockdown happened, we were in the middle of a values project to nail down what the values we want for our firm are. And this new start will tie in with introducing these really well. One of those values is trust. People have enjoyed being untethered from the office. We've had to trust staff to work away from office supervision, and they've proved that they can do it effectively. So we hope to offer a much more flexible working environment than we have in the past. It'll also be fascinating to see how clients want to engage with us in the new post-COVID world. So I'm excited about the future and looking forward to a time when this awful pandemic is over and we can get back to doing what we do best. So this leads nicely into Nadia. So our next speaker is Nadia Biles-Davis, the Chief Operating Officer at Sharp Pritchard LLP. Nadia is the Vice Chair of the Law Society's Law Management Section, the LMS. In her role with Sharp Pritchard, her focus is on strategic business operations, people management, marketing, and business development. She'll be talking about the future of work post-COVID and planning for the new normal. So over to you, Nadia.
Thank you, Clive. So we've heard from David in relation to what COVID-19 and the impact of that has on the immediate return to work and preparations and risk assessments. And then we've seen a fantastic journey from Clive of the reality of what that return practically looks like. I think I've then inherited a little bit of crystal ball gazing for the future, or perhaps more professionally, horizon scanning, I think is what they say now. I think the starting point when talking about COVID-19 and the future is before we plough straight onto some of the learnings and some of the opportunities and positives is really accepting that this has been a really tough time. It's not just been tough economically and for businesses and law firms, but it has been tough personally for our teams and for our staff, whether work areas have fallen off a little bit, whether teams have been furloughed, people worried about their future, personal lives affected if one person has lost a job and the other one's still trying to work from home. So we're looking at the future in a very difficult environment at the moment. And I think the starting point for me is to really reflect on the possible opportunities and the learnings from that, and also taking into account what I think of as a sort of a scorched earth principle. And I saw a quote the other day that I thought was a lovely way to think about it, that after every fire and every scorched earth, saplings begin to sprout and forests grow back stronger than ever. And I think that really points to the opportunities that we have going forward into that post-COVID environment. So as Clive touched on, we have a very rare opportunity here. Most of us will have an entirely empty office space. We will have staff working at home. And we have the opportunity, which most of us will not have had before, to take a step back and reflect on what we want our future to look like. We also have the time in preparing for a return to the office to take the opportunity to look at what we, not only what we want the future to be, but take the time we need to plan and prepare for it. And I think in looking to the future, we also have to look at where we are now. And I think it's important to recognise that whilst everyone talks about the new normal and remote working, what we're in at the moment is not the new normal. This might be familiar to a few people who are listening or watching this webinar. It's not usual to have flexible work, part-time working for most, or remote working, sorry, for most people that is entirely exclusively at home. Most people will have some office time, and most people will have some face-to-face interaction with their colleagues and with their clients. So this current situation in that way is unusual. We at the moment have no office at all, save for what we have set up at home. Ordinarily, we would have some office infrastructure. We would have the resources that an office provides, supplies, a place for administration, a giant photocopier, printer, client areas and meeting rooms. And we don't have that opportunity to make the most of at the moment. We're also more likely to have been thrown into remote working in a bit of an emergency. I know I was at a conference late February, and we were doing a bit of sort of elbow, not shaking hands, but bumping elbows or bumping feet. But at that time, it wasn't actually thought of that we would go into a full lockdown. It was more about the security measures and the distancing. So for many firms, there was a sudden shift to remote working. And that meant there was limited planning opportunities, limited time to implement the technology and infrastructure that a full team move to remote working needed, limited time for people to equip themselves at home. And there was also the need to have a lot of learning on the go. Ordinarily, if you were shifting to a remote working situation, you'd be looking at what those learning needs are, and you'd be putting the training in place in advance. But for many firms, that learning has been very much on the hoof. And there's also been issues over perhaps bandwidth, or Wi-Fi, and whether there's been enough of that for everybody. And there's also been, more likely than not, less preparation in terms of what that home office setup looks like. So for many people who are planning to work from home in advance, they will be looking at what they have and what equipment they have and how their chair is set up. And at the moment, we're very much in a situation where people are still having to make do in terms of whether their home is fit for home working and whether they have what they need. We've also got people on furlough, so people will not have had the opportunity necessarily to be working with the people that they would ordinarily have to support them. And there's no relief, and I think this is a really important thing. Ordinarily, when people enjoy the benefits of working from home, they still have the opportunity to have some sort of social interaction. So they might finish work and have the opportunity to go to the gym or take their dog for a walk more than for once a day as it was in the beginning of lockdown. They might be able to join their choir and be doing choir or activities. The working from home during lockdown has been relentless, and that is not what usual working from home would look like. And then we of course have the caring responsibilities. Anyone who has young or old children at home who has enjoyed the benefits of home learning with their children whilst trying to work will know that that hasn't always been a joy or a success, but ordinarily you would not have that when you're working from home. So that's where we are at the moment in terms of remote working. But there have also very clearly been benefits. And as Clive touched on, we've had a huge amount of very quick upskilling. I think Clive said moved 3 years in 3 weeks. I had a partner say to me the other day that he'd moved from 1990 to 2020 in 2 weeks. It has been a huge, huge learning curve. Employees who have not been furloughed have also had the benefit of no longer finding themselves commuting. So for those people who live further away from the workplace, they've had a huge time saving. Many people who are still working, not on furlough and working from home, have found that they've actually had, in real terms, more money in their pocket because those commuting costs have fallen away, as well as those subsistence costs, you know, buying lunch, coffees, all of that sort of thing. And whilst work-life balance has been limited because of the nature of lockdown, there has been some work-life balance. So from a lot of colleagues in other law firms and lawyers that I'm talking to, you know, they're not getting up at 5:30, 6:30 in the morning to start the commute into the office. So they're starting their day a bit later, but they're actually starting work a bit earlier. They're finding that they can spend time with their family over lunchtime, and they're certainly home for dinner in the evening because they only usually have to pop around the corner or downstairs. So there is a work-life balance element, which will only be increased if that flexible working continues in the future. And there has been an opportunity for those who were a little more prescient about the lockdown to really provide an office environment that works for them. So some people, we have offices that are working plan, and we have offices that are very limited with maybe 1 or 2 people. We know that it can be a struggle to find a one-size-fits-all approach to an office environment that suits everyone. And actually, one of the benefits of remote working during lockdown for many has been that they've really been able to set up their working environment as they want it to work for them. And I think it has given people a sense of what a new future might look like. People have realised that if they don't have to commute into the office every day, they might be able to move further afield. They might have more disposable income, which they can apply to other things. So life could look a little different for some people with that flexibility. And then we look at the benefits for employers. Again, we've talked about the blank slate, an empty office, an opportunity to reset what work looks like and what post-lockdown future looks like. Upskilling is a huge piece for employers. For those people who did have traditional paper-based workers in their office, anyone who had been talking about moving to a more paperless way of working would have had to take a lot of time to try and convince people of the need for change and then put in place the training. To a certain extent, lockdown has ripped off that band-aid and thrust everyone into that new reality a lot quicker, which does have benefits for employers. Office space. With more remote workers, there is really a conversation now around office space and footprint. There are conversations to be had around whether that office space that employers have, firms have, is what they need for now. But certainly, even if there is no move to scale back because of the remote working and the possibility of remote working in the future, the nature of a future of remote working could possibly mean that you're engendering more room for growth within your office environment. And then there's a piece here around the reassessment of needs, where you've had people on furlough, where you've had people working remotely. There is really a time to reassess what support, what infrastructure is needed for that new remote working workforce. And then productivity. We know that remote working and flexible working can lead, in fact, to better productivity. I think historically there's always been a nervousness about enabling flexible working because perhaps managers and employers don't have the visibility that they would like. They can't see the bums on seats. But the academic body of work is that it does actually improve productivity. And then you've got this opportunity, we've all been thrust into an opportunity to have a bit of a try before you buy flexible working. For those employers who were perhaps nervous of flexible working or remote working, they've now had to try it and they've been able to see how it might work for them. And so then it's worth just looking at some of the statistics. I got these this week from the CIPD magazine, actually, and it's a bit of a mishmash of various surveys that have been ongoing over the last couple of months. And I think it really does point to the opportunities as well as in what the future looks like, and the lessons learned from this period of working remotely during lockdown. So you can see here 81% of UK workers miss small talk. I don't know about you, but the rise of Zoom has meant that I feel like I'm talking to people more than ever face to face. But actually, those water cooler moments where you just have the opportunity to bump into someone and exchange some pleasantries and really feel part of a company have fallen away a little bit. 55% report new back pains. Again, that goes to office setup. 48% report working long, irregular hours. I don't know about you, but I walk around the corner. I'm fortunate enough to have a home office upstairs, so I literally go from one room to the other in the morning, and it is quite hard to find the discipline to walk out of that room when I have work to finish. Ordinarily, you have to leave the office to get home at some point, but actually, when you're in your own home, you don't necessarily have that discipline. 26% have continued working despite illness, but then you've got the positive. 67% have enjoyed the autonomy of working from home, and 65% have felt valued by their employer during lockdown. So some great management there. So if we sort of group those into areas to explore, we've got an issue around perhaps communication and touch points with our employees. We've got an issue around infrastructure, and certainly that 55% of report of new back pains points to home working risk assessments. And then there's a piece around well-being. Obviously, we don't necessarily want people working from home when they're ill. We want people to take the time off that they need in order to recover. And working long, irregular hours as a continued process, as a regular thing, is not going to be good for the well-being of our people. So that's some takeouts from the current normal of lockdown remote working. And I just thought it was useful to reflect on a McKinsey report that came out in May. McKinsey talk about the move to a contact-free economy. And when I've been talking to many colleagues about what post-lockdown working might look like once we're out of that risk assessment, the necessities of a risk assessment, and when we're looking at the reimagining of a workplace and work practice, a lot of people focus quite obviously on what the business needs, and then they focus on what their employees want and their employees need. There's not a huge conversation at the moment around what clients need. And I think it's important when we're looking at the future of what work might look like, that we not only accept and recognise that our employees have been upskilled to live life more remotely and contact-free, but our clients have as well. And so how will that impact on their buying behaviour? How will that impact on their expectations in how they get legal advice? I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle there that needs to bear equal weight with both business considerations and employee considerations. So what could the future look like if we're looking post the lockdown initiatives that we have to put in, and we look at the lessons learned from our remote working at the moment? Flexible working is the first and obvious one. I think it is utterly unavoidable. Not only will we be faced with a workforce who have demonstrated that they can work from home, but we are faced with a workforce who have been given the equipment, training, and software to do that well, because we have had to do that as employers to enable the continuation of our business during lockdown. So we need to be prepared for flexible working requests. We need to think as a business about how we're going to deal with those requests fairly, and what the business needs if we are going to have a more remote workforce. The likelihood is that the future is more mobile, both for our employees and also for our clients. Marketing. It has been the rise of webinars and podcasts during remote working. I have seen more than ever, and I think many law firms who at one stage were thinking that it might be something they'd consider for the future have now found it absolutely necessary. And that will mean newly adaptive marketing strategies for all law firms, irrespective of size, irrespective of location. And the benefits of webinars and podcasts is that we have moved beyond geographical boundaries for our marketing in many senses. But on the same page of that, we've increased the competition for ourselves, because where we might have been for a local high street firm be thinking of our competitors in a specific geographical area, suddenly we could have more competition from those outside of our immediate geographical area who are doing the same type of work in a more contact-free economy. And then we have tech-savvy clients whose buying choices will have changed. They're much more likely to be looking online and wanting to access things online because that is what they've got used to during lockdown. Office space. I've talked about office space already. I've talked about perhaps that in the future we might need less office space if we have a more mobile workforce, or if we keep the same office space, it engenders the opportunity for growth because we have a new mobile workforce. But it's also about the nature of the office space. The traditional working space has been a desk for a person to go to work and work. And I think the likelihood is that is going to change. Where we have more Teams meetings and Zoom meetings, those are likely to continue. And we need to think about how that's going to impact on the office space. And noise levels in open plan environments going to increase as everybody has a headset on and they're meeting and talking to people online, much more so than they're likely to be moving into a meeting room. And if people don't have to go into the office to work, and because they can work from home, what will they be going into the office for? For me, I think it's more likely that they're going into the office to meet their colleagues, to maintain the sense of belonging to a company. We talked about the fact that people miss their small talk, but also there's a piece there around collaborative working and also client hubs. You know, will it become the workspace of the future, become a place where actually people go to interact with their clients and meet their clients and provide a visible service to their clients in that way? So I think that is very much a piece for consideration. Business support and staffing. There's a new imagining, I think, for business support for law firms at the moment. I think we have had the opportunity, whilst working remotely, to think about what business support is really necessary for our business. And I think some people may have found that where they thought there was an integral piece of support, whether it was, you know, post-DX admin, or whether it's a specific support role, they might have found that actually they've managed quite well without them. They've been forced to outsource. And I think there will be a rejigging of what the support people, fee earners need, lawyers need, in order to do their job effectively and efficiently and as productively as possible if they're in a more mobile environment. And out of that, I think there's also a piece here about new leaders emerging. So there's a different type of talent that has emerged over lockdown. I think there is a new talent where people have been able to demonstrate that they can embrace change, they can embrace new technology, they've been able to lead by example and demonstrate their leadership. So it might be that there's a little been a shift in terms of what talent looks like for your firm in that new working environment. And then finally, technology. We've all had to work our way through new technology and adapt to remote working. But what does that look like moving forward for law firms and operations and practices? For example, do we now need to consider mobile time recording? If you didn't have that before, but you have people who are much more mobile in the way that they work and working from home. When we look at remote clients or clients who maybe don't feel that they need to come into the office, do we now need to look, if you haven't before, at client portals? There is, by the very nature of embracing technology, needs to be a much clearer targeted focus on cybersecurity more than ever. And then again, it's looking at technology as a means to perhaps look at efficiencies in the processes that we employ, and there's a piece there around automation. So Clive touched on his survey, and I don't think you can look at a newly imagined future without speaking to your people. there are some very simple solutions out there for every size of law firm. I use SurveyMonkey. I'm a huge fan. I ask everyone everything, and it's great to get the feedback. It's a very simple employee engagement piece. We know that engaged teams are happier and more productive, but I think it's all the more necessary now when we are in a bit of a grey area and people are nervous about perhaps what the future looks like. And so it's a way, that piece of engagement is a way of bringing back everyone into the company by talking to them and making sure that they're being listened to. It focuses minds on their return to the office, where people have got into a pattern. If your choice is that you want actually to bring people back into the office, that engagement piece starts to get people thinking about that. It's an opportunity to explore the lessons learned from remote working, what worked well, what hasn't worked well, what might need to change for the future. It helps manage expectations, because if you have heard from your people what they want and what they're expecting, you can then adapt how you communicate and how you're going to manage those expectations for the future. Surveys are also a really good starter for 10 for that change management piece. When you're starting to change minds, so if for example you did want to move into a more fluid workspace, a more mobile workspace, and you're changing what the nature of work looks like for your people, it helps gather people's minds in terms of what that change might be, and gets people thinking about the future and reflecting on their own learnings. And so it's a really important starter for 10 for the change management. And then I've thrown in there at the end the client focus groups. I had that Venn diagram which I touched on very briefly about business needs and employees, and then where the clients fit, because we know that in the same way that staff have been upskilled in their technology and their expectations, clients have had the same reality during lockdown, and their behaviours might change. And for those companies that do have long-standing clients, who have great client relationships, who are really connected to their local community, I would suggest client focus groups are a real win for you, because they will be able to tell you what their clients want. It might be that they say, do you know what, I've had enough of lockdown. I want to see my solicitor. I want to have some human contact. That's very relevant, particularly for some work areas. But it might be that people start saying, well, actually, you know, I want to just search online and get the answer, or I want to be able to connect remotely, and I want to see where my case is, and I don't feel the need to go into the office anymore because I've adapted, and I want to access my legal advice differently. And I think it's important that you connect to your own individual client groups to assess what that need will be, not least because all of this future and this horizon scanning will change depending on your practice. Everybody's new reality will be different, depending on their work practice, their geography, their people, and their client base. And so it's important to pull those threads together to see what is going to be best for you in the future. So just in terms of just some headlines for a survey that a firm might want to do before looking to move back and thinking about what the future looks like. Obviously, we've got a piece there around technology and infrastructure. Has the technology worked? Do people have what they need to work effectively and productively if they're going to work remotely? Do they think that their needs will change if they are coming back into the office? Clive mentioned paperless working. It might be that the reality of going back into the office looks different for people now that they've experienced home working. Will they need more training? What has worked well and what hasn't? Team management and communication, again, what has worked well and what hasn't. For me, I think there's a real opportunity here to focus on the junior end of the team. I think one of the challenges that has come out of remote working is how management and supervisors can effectively train and delegate work effectively. So I think there is a piece there about listening to your junior talent and hearing from them how remote working has worked for them, and what they might be nervous about if it was to continue, or what they benefited from. Business support, again, during lockdown. Have your teams had the support that they needed? What has worked well, what hasn't? Training needs, there is going to be an ongoing training need. And then expectations. What are their expectations, both coming out of lockdown How have they found remote working? And again, what has worked well and what hasn't? It enables you to assess the future if you're looking at flexible or more mobile working. But it also enables you to engage with your people and respond to concerns that they might have. And I do think it's important at the end of any survey to really report back on what you've learned. So take the feedback, assess it as a business. Does it work for you? What are you going to say about it? You know what your employees think, and you need to report back, and you need to demonstrate that you've been listening and what your response is. So looking ahead to the road to recovery, again, I've touched on this. No, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. There is going to be no one future that works for every firm. You need to assess what works for you, for your people, for your clients, and tailor it to fit. Parallel planning. There is a huge focus at the moment in relation to the post-lockdown requirements for workplaces. We've talked about the COVID risk assessment, but I think the time is now also to be planning and looking ahead for the future. I think it's a question of doing both. There is a natural tension there. So where we've got, for example, social distancing in the office, and then if you talk about mobile workspaces and collaborative workspaces, they tend to, there's a tension there in terms of people sharing desk or sharing workspace. But I think you need to be looking forward to the future and looking at how that transition might match the business expectations and the employee expectations, and preparing for that. Training will and must continue. For many people who might have been thrown into remote working, there will be additional training needs, and it might be that there's been training that's been put on hold because it wasn't considered suitable during remote working, and you were waiting to get back into the workplace. And then the final piece for me is about staying in touch. These listening exercises, the client focus groups, I don't think this is a one-off exercise. I think this is something that needs to continue as firms learn and grow and adapt into the new reality, because it's new for everyone. It's going to be new for the business, it's going to be new for the clients, and it's going to be new for your employees. And so that element of continuing to listen is going to be hugely important. So that's my presentation in terms of what the future might look like and how we might be able to prepare for it. I'll just stop sharing my screen and come back. Clive, shall I hand it back over to you? I don't know if you're all...
If I can
go back
facilitate
to Emma to see whether there are any questions, basically.
Yeah. So if anyone has, I've got a couple of questions I can ask, but I just want to open it to the floor first to see if anyone, raise your hand if you'd like to ask something of the group. No, okay, I've got a couple here. So the first one, we are a small high street family firm. We have been working from home successfully for the last 12 weeks. However, we are COVID secure and can return to the office. We would ideally like to return to work due to the ease of supervision. But with government advice being to work from home if you can, do we need to continue working from home? I'm not sure if the advice is necessarily that anymore, but I didn't know what if David, Clive and Nadia had a point on that. So I suppose there's a lot of firms that are feeling, well, should we be reopening the office? Is there a need for this big rush?
I mean, I can take that one just from our firm perspective. We've taken the view that we're working effectively from home. We know that there's a nervousness about the return to the office. And so we've very much said that whilst the government position is we should work from home if we can work from home, that we're going to enable a continuation of working from home. We're not choosing to push people back into the office at the moment.
I'd just add to that I think the current position is really clear, and that is that you continue working from home. You only go back to the office if you absolutely have to. And of course, some lawyers do. You know, if you're an advocate at court, perhaps you do need to collect papers, etc. But no, nothing's changed. And I think that the default position really is that it's just a little bit too early. I know the shops are reopening, etc. But and that's for reasons of the economy. And as Nadia has said, you know, I think most firms have made a success out of this and are working at home. So I think the short answer is no.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. We're looking forward in this within this talk, aren't we, to what's going to happen in the future. We're not saying rush back to work now by any means. No, it's just plan and prepare, and when you do, make sure you do it safely.
Absolutely, and taking Clive's lead in coming up with creative ways to enable things like wet signatures, for example, and obviously here in Wales we're a lot further behind where they are in England, where people are in England as well, to be fair. So the second question I have, and it may not be appropriate for people in this group to answer, but it does touch on that supervision element as well. With regards to flexible working, do we know if the legal aid agency has a view on supervisors not being in the office 5 days a week? Well, I suppose that's true of all the regulated practice, that you don't have that supervision, face-to-face supervision. But does anyone have any particular input from the legal aid agency at all? No.
Well, I can say that at the moment they are exercising flexibility. So no, the legal aid agency definitely do not expect supervisors to be in the office 5 days a week. They expect supervision to be carried out remotely. And I hope this is helpful, but just to say that in a couple of weeks' time, we are doing a webinar with the legal aid agency where we go precisely through what their expectations are in relation to contract management and supervision.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you, David. I'm happy to share a link to that if that helps. I'm just going to...
I have a question.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead. Thanks.
Okay, David Edwards, Osborne Solicitors, Colwyn Bay, North Wales. Clive, I noticed earlier on your Pontypool office had some Law Society sponsored posters bilingual. Where do they come from?
Online, actually, on the Law Society Toolkit site. There are bilingual posters there.
Oh, they're on there, are they? Okay, yeah. I've had a look at it. I couldn't find anything.
So what I can do, so we've got it on our website as well, alongside some cyber secure posters. So okay. At the end of the webinar, so I need to crop and edit and upload the video and all the material that we have. And when I share after the event, I'll email everybody with the slides from today, the video from today, and I will also point you to the news story. So if you go onto Legal News Wales, in the news section, there's also you'll see one of the latest news items is all those resources from the Law Society, and also from a company providing the some cyber security handy posters to put out and about, which is really useful. So you'll get a link to those.
Okay, good. Thank you for that.
No worries.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, Richard, do you want to say anything on that?
Yes, thanks, Clive. David, one of your colleagues in North Wales, mentioned it to us last Wednesday, I think it was, and we managed to have them produced and out within the day. So they've been on the website for a week or so.
Okay.
Have you been getting the regular updates from us? Because we did send them out last week.
Yeah. I've probably been looking in the wrong place, pressing the wrong buttons or something like that, and I don't find it. Cheers, thanks.
We thought we'd share them as well, just to be a bit helpful. Anybody else got any questions or comments? Bit of feedback about what they're doing with their firm? It's okay if you don't. It's not a problem. We've probably come to time anyway. So what I'll do, I'll share, obviously you've got all the contact details, I'll share the link to the law management section, the Law Society, everything that we've talked about today, all the materials. If you have any questions, just come back to me. That's not a problem, I can forward them on. I hope you all have a great afternoon, and I hope to see you again. Please keep checking out the events page. The next event is on professional indemnity insurance, and the next round of applications going through in October, a really useful event with Howden and with DAC Beechcroft. So again, our events are all free, and we'd love to see you there. But thank you once again to our speakers for all their time and hard work in preparing for today, and I hope to see you all again very soon.